Welcome to the Peak Mental Performance Podcast with Joe Schillero, optimizing your mental health and athletic performance one episode at a time.
All right, and welcome everybody to another episode of Peak Mental Performance. I have with me today Dr. Brett Wingeier. He's an engineer and neuroscientist with a PhD in Biomedical Engineering. He's currently CTO and co-founder of Halo Neuroscience and is the creator of Halo Sport, which we're going to be talking about today. It's a wearable neurostimulator device that's used for athletic training. Prior to that, Dr. Wingeier was principal engineer and clinical scientist at NeuroPace, bringing to market the first fully implantable brain device for epilepsy. So thank you very much, Brett, for taking the time to talk today.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be on the podcast with you, and thanks for the intro, and thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So for your product's been out for a little while now, but I think a lot of people are still either have just know very little bit or aren't really familiar with how transcranial stimulation can be used in applications for athletic performance. So I know that your Halo Sport device uses transcranial direct current stimulation. For people who have no idea what that is, can you give a rundown of what transcranial stimulation is and how it's implemented in the product you created?
Right. So, just to start from the sports performance perspective, you appreciate this as an athlete. So much of our performance is related to how well our brain controls our muscles, and even if your athletic goals are power and strength and endurance, it's not just about how big your muscles are. It's about firing all the right parts of those muscles in the right sequence at the right time for optimum output. So there's this amazing ability for training the brain to help us get better results out of our training. So what transcranial direct current stimulation, or TDCS, does under the hood is it helps your neurons fire together by putting a very small amount of electrical current on the scalp. Enough of that makes its way through the scalp and through the skull that it gently polarizes your neurons, your brain cells, helps them fire together. When neurons fire together, that's the language of the brain. That's neuroplasticity, and that's the way that your brain optimizes itself. So when you train, your brain is always getting better at controlling your body. And this helps that happen a little bit faster, so you get accelerated results from your training.
Awesome. And I'm curious with having been working in the medical field, and obviously with NeuroPace and things that were focused more on neurological conditions, what kind of piqued your interest in going the route of doing something in when it relates to athletic performance?
Well, so my co-founder and I we're both athletes ourselves, although it's taken a hit lately with having kids in a startup. But
right.
Really that's taught us the value of training more efficiently and making sure that whatever we do in the limited time we have it, we do it smart and mindfully. We had been following this field of what you call non-invasive brain stimulation, basically ways to help the brain with products that you can wear and just use at the gym or in the field. We'd been following that since about 2005. The science behind all this had been building even since 2001. And we were watching this from the perspective of being immersed in very hardcore medical devices, implants for epilepsy, et cetera. And we realized the power of neurotechnology, but we also realized that it's going to be more powerful and relevant to more people if we can take this and build it into a product that anybody can just take and use. So we watched the science evolve. It was clearly time to build it into a product. Working in sports not only was lined up with our interests, but it let us make something that was headphones, because the brain's motor cortex is right under the band of a pair of headphones. So it gives you something that that looks normal in the gym. It gives you something that works, because one of the best clusters of scientific data is in this whole field is all about movement performance and movement training and being able to optimize this brain to body connection. So really, sports was the first clear application for what we were doing, and we were excited to be able to make a headset that guys like you can use to get results.
Absolutely. For those listening, that this will be included in an article about it, but I've been just wrapping up 6 weeks of trying out the device myself, and I think most people are familiar at this point, but I compete in powerlifting, so I've been seeing how that meshes with me training in that sport, and I'll kind of be writing up on my experience with that. But yeah, I think that's definitely for something that's, if you're doing transcranial stimulation, the fact that you can kind of conceal it in a pair of headphones probably makes it a lot more malleable for people than if they had to walk around with something strapped to their forehead or something.
Yeah. It's real. People care about what products look like, and nobody wants to feel like they're doing something unusual. You want it to look good. It's an important part of taking all the science and making it into a real product.
Absolutely. So I've gone through some of the, like you said, there's actually quite a bit of research that's been done for a number of years on stimulation and its different applications. I think for people who aren't as familiar with a lot of that research, I think their probably initial reactions that you probably get a lot are, the question of, well, is it safe for me to be sending electrical current into my, through my skull into my brain? And so can you just speak a little bit to the safety that you have found with developing this product with that technology?
Yeah, no, and that's a great question. So first of all, the answer is that it's safe, but let me give you all the detail about why. Part of the answer is there's this body of scientific literature now where tens of thousands of people have used this kind of technology, and everything's been tracked, and there's a body of safety data that's not just coming from Halo, it's coming from the scientific community. The next part of the answer to that is in our own data with thousands of users now, and not just users out in the field, but users that we've studied in our own clinical trials in-house. We've tracked safety, and the data are great. You can see it on our website. The third part of the answer is just when you step back to basic principles. The electricity is the language of the brain in the first place, and the actual fields that are being applied are really very small. Now, the brain is great at responding to small fields, which is why this has an effect. But the other part of that is the amount of neuroplasticity that this is bringing it's probably not too different from what your brain can do on your best days, when you're most emotionally engaged, when everything's just clicking for you. But the power of this is you're just able to bring that to your workouts where and when you need it. Which, if you're anything like me, I know I'm not at my peak mental engagement at every 5 a.m. workout. So being able to do that consistently, it's a huge boost to your training.
Absolutely. And I know you talked a little bit about, in terms of how it benefits movement, you talked about neuroplasticity, and I know that from what I've read that TDCS can benefit movement in a couple different ways, in terms of motor skills, and then movement endurance, and then the actual strength itself. So can you talk a little bit about how that neurostimulation can benefit different characteristics of movement in that way?
Yeah, absolutely. So when you look under the hood at the factors that come together for peak movement performance, there's two things going on. There's motor synergy, which is the ability to fire the right muscles and the right parts of your muscles at the same time. And then there's motor sequence, which is the ability to fire everything in the right sequence. And you put the two of those together, and that's what leads to peak performance. You could think of motor synergy as being able to stretch out your hand to make to make a precise chord if you're playing the guitar, and sequence is the ability to string those together in a precise pattern. The same applies if you're doing a vertical leap or your golf swing or whatever your athletic skill is. And there's great data out there showing that both of those types of motor performance, they get better when you train because your brain optimizes its neural network that controls your body. So when you increase neuroplasticity, you increase the rate that this amazing neural network in your motor cortex is optimizing itself, and that's what gets you the results. When you look at something like an explosive vertical leap, really nailing motor synergy and motor sequence translates to things like increased rate of force development, and that translates to explosive performance, that translates to a higher vertical leap.
Yeah, it's really interesting, and I think it fits in it's very interesting how it fits into a lot of many of our listeners compete in kind of strength-based or anaerobic sports, and ones that either have maximal strength or explosiveness built into them. And that's one of the reasons I was really interested in this kind of technology and speaking to you, is because I think people don't realize sometimes how much something like maximal strength or maximal, explosiveness, something like vertical leap, is neurological. Because I think sometimes, particularly people that are just starting training, feel like they're going to be at their best at any given day, and they don't realize that really your neurological state fluctuates from day to day, and even throughout the day. Exactly.
It's a couple things that really amazed me when I first started to learn about motor systems, and it's probably stuff you and your listeners know already, but one is how much of the gains, especially when you first start to train, are due to just neuromuscular optimization, your brain getting better at controlling your body. You get stronger when you first start to train. You get stronger with that mechanism before any change even happens to your muscles. The other great data point is something called the bilateral deficit, where if you try to jump with if you do a vertical leap with both legs, normal vertical leap, then there's a certain amount of energy that you can deliver with your two legs at the same time. Now, if you split that up and you do left leg and then right leg, you can actually do more total energy if you do two separate jumps, left leg and right leg. And the biggest reason for that is your brain just can't get its act together to get that maximal performance out of both legs at the same time. So it's a neurological limit to your performance. The great thing about that is your brain can learn. It loves to optimize itself. So training lets you get better neurologically as well as building your muscles.
So from a practical standpoint of somebody using a device like yours for transcranial stimulation with training, can you talk a little bit about what that looks like? I've obviously been doing it myself, but for people who are not familiar, if somebody uses your device, uses the neurostimulation, what would, ideally they do in training to get the most out of that? Yeah,
great question too. Let me lead that one off by saying it's not magic. We're not downloading kung fu into your brain. We'll work on that in 2018, but no guarantees. But that's also the part of the power of this is it interacts with your own high quality training and helps you get better results faster from that training. So one of the key things that we tell people to remember when they use brain stimulation in their training is think about measurement, because if you're measuring your performance, then your brain is already engaged in trying to optimize for something. It's a key part of the feedback loop. If you're training in a vacuum and not monitoring your performance and not being mindful of how every rep was different from the last and how you're improving, then you're cutting out that feedback loop that lets your brain optimize itself. So mindful training, thoughtful, high-quality training, hard training, and then measuring your results and letting that feedback loop happen. That's what lets technology like Halo Sport accelerate that feedback loop so you get results faster.
That's really so I'm curious with the way that, obviously, as you spoke to, with the different ways that this can benefit movement, have you seen in your experience with different, I know there's a lot of different teams and athletes using the technology, have you seen certain types of sports or types of activities that have benefited more than others from this?
I think the biggest unifying factor really is this notion of training mindfully and quantifying your performance. And we've seen that across athletes in all different sports. CrossFit stands out. There seems to be this really great kind of analytical tendency there to measure what you're doing and just focus on results. We've seen great results from everything from endurance athletes to golfers, to powerlifters, to CrossFitters. More skill-based sports. Baseball, measuring ball speed off the bat, things like that. And then even with musicians, musicians are fascinating because musicians are high-level musicians are athletes in many ways, because they're constantly pushing their bodies to the limit. And a musician also has something else really interesting going on, because they're always trying to learn new pieces, and they're pushing that motor learning in a very particular way. So we've even seen great results with musicians who find that they can learn pieces faster and get more benefit out of the time they have to train.
I know that with transcranial stimulation, I know it's been used for, as you said, there's a lot of research on it. It's been used for a lot of different applications, even outside of the athletic world, with other psychiatric and cognitive conditions and different things like that. Do you foresee yourself and Halo Neuroscience ever going into one of those other arenas, or do you think you're going to stick with kind of the athletic performance movement side of things?
Yeah, I think we're really excited about some of those other areas. Certainly, the genesis of the company here is Halo Sport, and we feel we love sports, and we use it ourselves for training. I'm a cyclist and climber. My co-founder is a cyclist and a climber too. But really, the brain is everything, and that speaks to, first of all, the fact of that this is applicable across so many different sports, because the brain is behind so much in performance. And then if you step away from movement, whether it's things like learning and attention and focus and mental training, learning new things, and then even stepping beyond that to future medical applications, things like stroke rehabilitation, physical therapy, chronic pain, depression. There's really good data out there in the science and in the clinical research about all of these. And certainly the genesis of the company was also in medical devices. That's what we spent most of our career doing. So we're really looking forward to approaching some of these other ways that we can help people unlock their potential and make their brains better. With Halo Sport, even we already have a clinical trial in stroke rehabilitation going on at the Medical University of South Carolina, and there's just more and more of that interest developing, and more clinical studies getting off the ground with Halo Sport, which we're really excited about.
Yeah, that's great. Are there any things that I'm curious that, now that this is, I think it was just past a year now that the product has been out, has there been anything that since creating this product, as more people have used it, that has surprised you that maybe you weren't expecting when you first created it?
That's a great question. I think we've been think we've been really pleasantly surprised at just how the sports and training, especially the strength and conditioning community, has responded to Halo Sport. I think one of our concerns when we first started working on this was, us coming from this medical devices neurotech world. We were certainly immersed in this, but we looked at each other and we asked, is this something that magic we can bring to the world, and we can tell the story and help people understand that it is effective and this is real, but and at the same time that it's not magic. Accurately understand what it can do and what it can't do. And then I think as soon as we started talking to people about this is what Halo Sport is and this is what it can do, we realized that everybody's already thinking about the brain, and I think that's part of a revolution in training that's been going on for quite a while now. Is people are hungry for greater performance, and people are hungry for greater performance in a way that's natural and organic, so to speak, and just optimizes the way you use the natural faculties of the body and the brain. And the brain it's clearly the place where there's amazing room for improvement in how people train. So I think that was a great, pleasant surprise. And just we'd come to people and we'd talk about the role of the brain, and they'd say, yeah, that's exactly what we've been thinking about for the last few years in our training. Let's talk about how we can use technology to bring that up and get more value out of how our brain controls our body.
Yeah, it makes sense.
And let me. I was just thinking another part of the answer there in terms of what surprised us. I think we were also a little bit surprised, and again pleasantly surprised by how the picture started to emerge regarding how neuropriming, how brain stimulation can affect performance for an endurance athlete. I think looking at the science when we first came into this, the consensus among scientists probably would have been that the effect on endurance is related to essentially modulating how you respond to fatigue, and that seemed a little bit unclear when we first, on the endurance side, when we first got into this. Now, as we've watched the data and as we've watched how people use Halo Sport, that started to make tons more sense. And in retrospect, it should have already made perfect sense. Looking at our experience as endurance athletes. I was a rower in college, and one of the things you realize rowing competitively is there's this cycle of fatigue that happens when you start to get a little bit fatigued, and that makes your technique start to fail. And as soon as your technique starts to fail, it's this vicious cycle, and you just lose the ability to keep it together, and you start flailing, and it just cascades. And for me, that's one of the biggest performance limiters, in any kind of endurance activity, whether it's rowing or cycling or whatever. Now, if you look at something like neuropriming, like Halo Sport, the ability to ingrain patterns of correct movement deeper into your muscle memory and be able to execute them seamlessly, it gives you the ability to do that and execute in the face of fatigue and just keep it together for longer. And it puts off that vicious cycle that you get into as an endurance athlete. And at the end of the day, that's what translates to better performance in endurance sports, is just being able to keep your act together longer because you've done a better job at ingraining all this into muscle memory.
Is there any application with technology like this for youth, or is this something that you wouldn't want somebody who has maybe a brain that's more developing to be using? I'm curious of where this falls in terms of like age development and things like that.
Yeah, definitely a question we get asked. So, first of all, Halo Sport is intended for adults 18 and up. There's a couple reasons for that. But the biggest part of the reason is, excuse me, the biggest part of the reason is that kids already have amazing neuroplasticity, and their brains are still developing. Especially in younger kids, the skull is a little bit thinner, and you have this amazing developing brain that's already learning and optimizing at a rate far greater than any of us who are well past that point. So, between that and just the natural cutoff where when somebody's 18 they're an adult. Halo Sport it's intended for 18 and older. That said, there's interesting research, especially on the kind of clinical and medical side, about using this kind of brain stimulation in people younger than 18, and we're certainly following that research and seeing where the field evolves to.
Yeah, it makes sense. It's kind of what I figured the approach is with that, but I was curious just based on that being obviously movement development being a big thing with youth. On the flip side of that, with as you mentioned, neuroplasticity being better when you're younger, obviously as you age, and we see a lot of different neurological and cognitive deficits develop in people. Have you seen, or I know this is right now has been guided at the athletic population. Have you seen anyone, any kind of the aging population using this to help them ingrain proper movement patterns as they age, or do you foresee that as a potential application?
Yeah, no, I think we've definitely seen a lot of older athletes, and athletes is a broad term. Really, it's anybody who is thinking about how they move and trying to move better and push their bodies and push the brain-body connection a little bit. Especially in that sense, we've seen some older athletes using this, in everything from dance to yoga to lifting to golf, rowing for that matter, and excuse me, especially for an older athlete when you might have limited time to train if you're still kind of in the middle of your professional career. You might have movement patterns that are poor technique that's just been ingrained for years and years, and the ability to jumpstart changing those movement patterns and trying to rework your golf swing or whatever your technical issue is. If you pair that with high quality coaching or training or just mindful practice, then that's really powerful. So we've heard great things from older athletes, and for that matter, my mother-in-law is a Halo user, and she uses it for just general dexterity and being better at gardening. So there's some great stories out there.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, I think we touched on a lot of different areas, and I appreciate you getting into some of these topics, because I think obviously this technology, like you said, has been around for a little while, but I think most people would see this and probably aren't as familiar. So this is some good information for people if they start to get interested in this topic and what you're doing with Halo Neuroscience. If people are interested in learning more about Halo Sport or what the things you're working on at Halo Neuroscience, where can they go to do that? Yeah,
so the best place to start is our website. It's www.haloneuro.com, HALONEURO.com. And we've got a science page on there that dives into some of the science. We've got some white papers from ourselves, as well as links to some of the literature out there. And then we've got a page with case studies about some of the athletes and trainers who have used Halo, how they've used it, and what their story is. So that's a great jumping off point. And There's certainly tons of science out there now, and we just like any training technology, the best path is for people to dive in and understand how it works, what it does, how they can use it in their training, and then bring all that learning into how they train. So yeah, we love to get that information out there and answer questions, and certainly we've got a support link on our website too, and we're glad to answer questions from anybody.
Awesome. Well, hey, thank you again for taking the time to talk today. I know you're very busy, and this was, I think, some great information for people interested in this technology and seeing what that impact is. For people that are listening, as I mentioned earlier in the podcast, I'm going to be writing up an article on my personal experience with Halo Sport and how I saw it affect my training and my thoughts on the experience. And I think this podcast hopefully gives some good context to that as well. So thanks again, Brett.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you, Joe. It's been a huge pleasure talking to you.